Hello everyone and welcome to today's SANS webcast. So what's it mean to hack a car? My name is Carol Auth of the SANS Institute and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Matthew Carpenter, Principal Security Researcher with GRIM and on the Program Committee for the SANS Automotive Summit, and Michael Asante, SANS Director for the Industrial and Infrastructure. If during the webcast you have any questions for Matt or Mike, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note that this webcast is being recorded and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Mike.
Thank you, Carol. Appreciate that, and good afternoon, everybody. It's exciting to have this webcast. Today I want to do a quick introduction to Matt Carpenter and the subject at hand. It won't take up too much time because he's got an incredible amount of great information as it relates to automotive cybersecurity. But I want to talk to you about the importance of community. SANS has an incredible gift for helping bring people together. Just its network of folks from instructors and authors and technical experts to participate on SANS activities, to the folks who take that knowledge and put it to work in terms of cybersecurity strategies and practitioners. It just makes it such a joy to work at SANS, and we're here to do that today. In fact, in a bigger picture, as you know, SANS started in industrials and infrastructure focused to how we do business. We had an ICS industrial control system curriculum begin back in 2013. And we've been highlighting those topics in terms of automation systems all the way back into the early 2000s. One of the things that we felt that was an opportunity for the larger community is some of these specialized areas where automation technology and information technology are coming together to support everything from the development of products to products in the field. And in this case, in the automotive space, the connected car is an exciting opportunity to bring those folks together. So in fact, we're excited that we're going to be holding the first, if you will, inaugural SANS Summit around automotive. And you might think automotive has kind of, in the last 2 years, had a lot of buzz and there's been a lot of discussions and dialogues. We really feel that SANS has the ability to help bring together the community and be able to take great work being done not only on the research side and bring it into the strategy and technical direction for programs, whether that you're a supplier or a provider of products. And really our goal, as Matt Carpenter will talk a little bit about, is common understanding. The idea of understanding the real technical issues at a deep level, understanding how those things build into being able to support the foundations for enduring programs that help enhance the security in the automotive space. It's really a wide and deep space. What's exciting about automotive to me is it combines everything from protecting the enterprise systems around organizations and entities that are part of the automotive marketplace. It's about the connected car. It's about communications between cars and other things like infrastructures and other vehicles. It's about the supply chain, and it's about everything to include assembly plants where the products are assembled and integrated together into the products that we all rely upon. So that's an exciting opportunity, where it comes from. It's why we've engaged people like Matt and many other folks throughout the automotive marketplace to put together our first inaugural summit this May 1st and 2nd in Detroit. I invite you all to come join us there. We're going to be talking about trying to cover that broad spectrum from cyber to physical attacks on the vehicle itself, talking about the technical challenges and directions, decisions that are being made or will be made as it relates to what type of communication bus and how those decisions will play out and how to think about it from a security perspective. We'll be doing demonstrations. We'll be looking at real-world incidents, and most importantly, we'll be looking at what people are bringing together in terms of programs and how they're building to deal with some of the challenges and opportunities that we'll be talking about. And of course, we'll be holding training. So one of the things that we like to put a sharp focus on is how do you build that workforce that combines skill sets like electrical engineering alongside with IT security and new roles around product security. So folks that are blending the engineering and automation with cybersecurity principles. And we think we can really contribute to the space in that way and provide a high value time for us to do that while building the community. So that's our goal. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Carpenter here. He has an exciting, fast-paced landscape of technical issues for us to cover. And with that, Matt, what does it mean to hack a car?
Thank you, Mike. Thank you all for joining us today. I do have a whole lot of material to go through, so I will try to keep it mildly hair on fire and hopefully very interesting and exciting. There's my email address in the slide deck you'll be able to get from SANS. If you have any questions at the end, you can ask them. If you think of anything later, please feel free to reach out. I'm very happy to be a resource for the community. As they said, I'm a principal security researcher for a company named Grim. I've been doing exploitation for the last 11 years, bug hunting and vulnerability exploitation, writing exploits. I got into automotive about 3.5 years ago. I started creating a tool because that's kind of how I learn a new space, and things just took off from there. But the thing that I keep running into is wildly variant opinions of what it means to hack a car. And as I'm sitting down writing out notes to put into a presentation, I also have a few other things that I'm trying to boil this information into. I ended up, this is page 2 of handwritten and typed notes. It's so much stuff to collate. It's not an easy thing to boil down into an easily digestible fashion. So what exactly does car hacking mean? As you may have guessed, it depends. What's it depend on? Well, who you're talking to. Different people think of different things. Who's doing the hacking also changes the conversation a bit. There are many different attack surfaces in automotive, and so we're trying to flesh out exactly those attack surfaces, where an attacker plugs into a car to help understand how to look at hacking a car. Some examples of what it means to hack a car: manipulating an electronic control unit, an ECU, through a diagnostic session, for example. There are different read-write registers that you can manipulate to modify, for example, how brakes work or how the power steering works. There are different ways to send messages to such things, such as, hey, turn the wheel. Those are functional messages that are just part of how the automobile operates. Also, another very popular way of looking at hacking a car is to take over the infotainment system via the internet or maybe SMS messages. And we'll talk actually a little bit more about that in a little bit. Maybe hacking the Wi-Fi connection or Bluetooth connection. Manipulate the standard protocols there, or manipulate the thing providing those services in the car. Other things like accessing GPS of a car or turning on the microphones, maybe other tracking mechanisms. So there are many different things that go into what it means to hack a car. So for this presentation, our goals are to identify some of the means and the methods as well as meanings of car hacking. And as you'll see, there are still many different things that mean car hacking, but hopefully by the end you'll be able to have a framework to pin them into that all unify in your brain. To provide some context for scoping conversations, that's the primary goal for my own selfish gain. When I'm sitting down with an OEM or a supplier, it'd be really helpful to at least have them be able to come to the table a lot more quickly with an understanding of just how all over the map the term car hacking can mean. So they don't say, well, I need to know if this can be hacked. Okay, let's see what you mean by that, because that will determine how we can best serve you. So OEMs and suppliers are I think, the key beneficiaries of today's talk, but also aftermarket individuals and corporations, as well as other exploitation experts like myself. It may be self-serving for me to not have to educate quite so much when we sit down to scope a project, but it's helpful to others as well. And the reason that I'm in automotive isn't just the money, although I do like to feed my family. It's because my loved ones rely on this thing called the road system, and other cars being hacked puts them at jeopardy. So, depending on who's speaking, let's talk a little bit about the motivations of our two top focal points. Our automotive manufacturing companies, the big three in the United States, Ford, Chrysler, and GM, and then the myriad throughout the world that actually we buy their cars. But it turns out they don't make the cars. They are car specifiers. They design the cars, and they give specifications out to various suppliers and say, please create these modules. They have to do these things and respond this way to these circumstances. And from what I've been able to see, those specifications are well thought out. They've been doing this for a while, so it's pretty exciting. But again, they don't create many of the modules that go into a car. By and large, they rely on somebody else to do that. So they're responsible for the overall vehicle security, and they care very much about that, but they're not ultimately doing a great deal of the work on that. They are interested in security design of their automobiles, as well as that goes into the devices their suppliers supply, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So right now, a lot of OEMs are looking for a way to test ECUs as delivered from their suppliers. Some sort of certification process is much of a checkbox type of arrangement as possible, understanding that security is not very checkbox friendly. And this is where OEMs can take great advantage from relationship building with their suppliers. It turns out that since the responsibilities are divided so heavily, it's really important for the suppliers and the OEMs to be on good terms and to engage not only at a business contractual level, but also from technical people sitting down and addressing how to overcome the security challenges. Now, I don't see this happening much, and I've been having a lot of conversations that I keep hearing, hey, that'd be really great, but, and then insert excuse about culture here. Truly, OEMs and suppliers will be best served by looking in that direction, building a relationship that can overcome just the contractual relationship they've had in the past. Another advantage that they have, that an OEM can get, is by contractually requiring that their suppliers make open to them their secure development lifecycle, so that the OEMs, if they have the right people with knowledge and understanding, can have an easier time knowing that the ECUs are developed with security in mind. From a supplier perspective, they create ECUs. Electronic control units are things with computers in them, put very simply. They implement the brake modules, the power steering control modules, the powertrain control modules, the transmission control modules, these things that make our cars go. Oh, and the physical security modules, the remote keyless entry, the passive key. All these things are created by suppliers. Also, your mirror control modules. Now, why do I care about mirrors? We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the suppliers are responsible for the design and architecture of their ECU as it has to provide services specified by the OEMs, but they do the design. then the implementation has to be sound. They have to go through rigorous testing to ensure that buffer management, for example, is not easily overcome to cause buffer overflows and remote exploitation from that direction. There are many other interesting things that ECUs have to deal with because their local subnet, the CAN network in most cases, is a hostile network, and it has to be treated as such. So they are also responsible for their development practices. Most of the code that goes into a car are written by suppliers. The suppliers made the ECU. Why wouldn't it be that way? So they have to have a very well implemented as well as supported and understood secure development life cycle. And then, of course, they're responsible for physical security. A lot of the stuff that they're going to be putting into vehicles or are already putting into their ECUs depends on the code that gets put in there, the certified code that gets put in there, not having any backdoors written into it or other things that the design process has integrity. So talking a little bit about who is doing the hacking. As we talked about in the abstract, car hacking has meant everything from modifying your old car to put in new digital console all the way down to remote control over the interstate. So let's talk about most of the people that aren't. The people we'll be talking about mostly are not modders, but we have to take modders into into consideration. People who modify their cars, they have a vested interest in automotive, and the OEMs are very interested in keeping modders interested in their vehicles because cool stuff is cool stuff. And when great mods show up on some trade rag or this hot car magazine, but it was made by Ford, the fact that it's made by Ford is not lost on the reader. And suddenly people get excited about Ford. And Ford actually has been putting out development kits for their automobiles to try to help get these types of people really interested in interacting with Ford cars. And I know that I don't want to favor Ford. This isn't a Ford fame thing. I know that other automobiles are doing similar things. I just grabbed their name out of the hat, actually. But they're interested in adding cool features. Security professionals, people who are not necessarily hackers, but know a lot about how to secure computer systems, they want to know what to protect and what they're protecting against. Exploitation engineers like myself, how do I get code execution? How do I influence this thing to do nefarious things? And organized crime is very interested in, well, more of the outcomes. It's no mystery that organized crime has figured out that hackers fit very well into their organizations and they can benefit greatly from them, but they don't care. They just want to have the effects. They don't care how. And then nation states. You really thought there was going to be something listed here? Okay, you twisted my arm. I'm not a nation state, but I do play one on TV. And let's just use our brain here. For about 20 years, or 10 years at least, we've all said, oh, the NSA, they can do all this other stuff. And then when Snowden came out and said, oh, they can do all this stuff, we suddenly got surprised. But we've been saying it for years. The government could do these things. So if I had to put on my nation state hat, and trust me, the U.S. is not the only nation state that gets involved in hacking, I would say that they'd be very interested in vehicular control, these cyber physical attacks, these things that allow them to assassinate people without any trace, or data acquisition. GPS, for example, this great tracking information, automotive information, the details of what happens within the car itself, and other things. I don't know. Most cars have a nifty little microphone inside them nowadays. So we have a few examples of what car hacking is like. First of all, 2010, I got a call out, work done by University of Washington and University of California in San Diego. They jointly published a paper back in 2010 called Experimental Security Analysis of a Modern Automobile. And it was, by and large, given a golf clap, if that. But they did some amazing work calling out the fact that, hey, these cars are really getting a lot of power, they're computer systems, and we can control them. But they did it over a CAN bus. So people were saying, oh yeah, great, thank you. In 2011, they came out with a paper with more depth and actual compromise called Comprehensive Experimental Analysis of Automotive Attack Surfaces. And in this paper, they detailed more of what could happen. And I really think that that played into what Chris and Charlie did a couple years later. And I think, honestly, I think that it had more to do with the fact that the community ignored them. University of Washington and University of California, UCSD folks, their papers were largely ignored. And so Chris and Charlie, when they put in for funding from DARPA, I believe that their goals were to say, these guys had a good point. Oh, by the way, F you. So Chris and Charlie, they wrote, so they did a lot of research, and in 2013, 2014, they released some of this research about how to hack a car. More hacker speak, not so much the, hey, we've got sigma, delta, gamma garbage that, sorry, I'm not anti-academia, but I really hate reading pure academic papers. So Chris and Charlie write to me. They wrote, hey, this is how you hack the thing. This is how it works. Here are the nibbles. Here's the bits. And they were met with some pretty good sized golf claps, but still a little ignored. And so in 2015, they released their paper and presentation on how to hack an unmodified car over the internet. And basically what they did was they figured out how to get on the Sprint network that these cars were using, just internet. They just had to get onto the internet through a Sprint phone. They were able to enumerate all sorts of Jeep vehicles or Chrysler vehicles that were using this stack. They were able to identify an unauthenticated message bus. And from this unauthenticated message bus, they found things like execute. Oh my gosh, thank you. And so they were able to, without even really hacking to the level that they're capable of, they're taking over the infotainment system. And from the infotainment system, they were able to modify the firmware for the CAN transceiver because it wasn't allowing them to just arbitrarily send whatever messages they want. So they modified that firmware, pushed it back down to the CAN transceiver, and then they were controlling the car. Tesla was also hacked in the last year by a group out of China called Keen Security Team. I forget the company name offhand, but the Keen team discovered that Tesla beacons out for Wi-Fi, looking for the low things like the nearest charging facility, and they figured out that the web interface library that they were using was from 2011 and had known vulnerabilities in it. So they just took advantage of those vulnerabilities. They said, thank you very much. Oh, by the way, I now own your trust fund. There are other researchers doing private research that I won't talk about except to say that it's being done. And then we've still got modders. So I've thrown a ton at you. It's been a little disjointed. Let's talk about car hacking from a different perspective. Let's begin with the end in mind. What is so important about a car? What you got here that's worth protecting? So if you think about it, a car is used for transportation. Duh, Henry Ford knew that. A car is also used for storage. Otherwise, why lock the doors? Why, we have vehicles that keep out the weather. So it provides protection and environmental control for us, for our things. We also have entertainment, maybe the infotainment system, or maybe just driving the thing, sports cars and whatnot, or even if it's just a little Dodge Omni that you're driving down the road like it was rented. We also have taken to using cars for business purposes, maybe as a mobile office. Maybe I know that I often get a call from my colleague, and I hear his turn indicator clicking pretty much every time we talk. It's clicked in my head that he calls me when he's driving somewhere, so that we can talk business, and he doesn't have to lose that time that he's driving. We've also seen automotive used as mobile attack platforms, and I took some liberties as to how to represent mobile attack platforms. You'll see the tank, and yes, tanks are and other military vehicles are part of what we're talking about here today. But look at the Google vehicle. We've got Google Street View. That is also a form of mobile attack platform. They take pictures. They identify Wi-Fi access points. There's a lot of things that they have capabilities in that car of doing that that we really don't consider very often. But also think about, as we move into a more connected future with automotive, think about your V2V vehicles, your vehicle-to-vehicle communication. Currently, we're focused on a technology called DSRC to allow our cars to talk to each other going forward and talk to the infrastructure, our roads and whatnot. So if I have a vehicle that is participating in V2V or V2X, vehicle to infrastructure and vehicle to anything, then my car could just as easily be considered a mobile attack platform. So taking that one level deeper, so those are the things that a car does. What values are we trying to protect about our car? Forgive the picture on this slide. I just fell in love when I saw it, just because it is so obtuse. So we're interested in reliability. We need the car to behave consistently, predictably. And I say car, but vehicle. Car, truck, tank. Think about all of them. APC. We're also talking about safety while driving and while you're parked. How do you make sure that you get there safely without causing damage? And then delivery. The car's actually got to go somewhere. Privacy. If we're doing business meetings or spending personal time or whatever, our privacy becomes very, very important. If a foreign government is able to eavesdrop on a dignitary from the U.S. or whatever country is important to you, that could have some very bad ramifications. If you're having a business conversation using sensitive information about a customer and their competition is able to eavesdrop, that's a problem. Economy of gas, tolls, business, the mobile office thing, and internet is also very important. And it's also important for my sake. I wanted to point out the fact that automobiles have become a great enabler, including a lot of things that I'm not even listing here, but they've come to represent freedom. And if you don't remember, try to remember back to when you were 16 or 17 and got your license, and the freedom that you felt with that. That is still the case today. Another way to look at cars, attack vectors. Because they're so complex, because they're becoming so powerful, we find that the attack vectors have grown immeasurably from what we remember growing up, at least for those of us who remember growing up. Local connectivity. One of the ways that we can hack a car is we just plug in a device. So maybe it's parked, and we find a set of wires that allow us to modify, to plug into a CAN bus or to a LIN bus, or there are many different forms of communication on a vehicle. Also connecting to an OBD port. Corey Thulin a couple years ago did some research on the progressive dongle that allows a reduced costs for insurance if you allow them to track your movements using, or track your driving style using something that just plugs into the OBD2 port on your car, and it connects up to a cellular network and transmits back to Progressive, hey, this is how they're driving. We had a really super hard braking 20 times in the last 5 minutes. They might take issue with that. It turns out they weren't securing their dongles very well. So connecting into the OBD2 port was something that allowed for attack. Other cars have become so wirelessly connected. For example, the TPMS sensors, the tire pressure management sensors that allow pressure sensors in the tires to communicate into the car so that the car can alert you, hey, your right front tire is low. Those are pretty standard ISM band radios that represent attack surface, and generally being heralded by important ECUs like the body control module. If you're able to find an exploit, a vulnerability in the body control module, you have basically control over the whole car. The remote keyless entry and passive key systems, wireless, still more ISM. We've got Wi-Fi, we've got Bluetooth. V2X is a can of worms. This is full radio connectivity, and we've got systems that have to actually modify how we drive based on the information there. That is a beautiful attack surface from an attacker's perspective. And autonomous driving in general. We also have internet-connected systems in a car, and these generally are the in-vehicle infotainment systems, the IVIs, or navigation systems if they're not part of the IVI. And these are things that run ARM-based systems with full internet connectivity. It's kind of like your phone, or even more powerful. And let's talk about back office attacks for just a second. A lot of vehicles nowadays are they're shipping with internet connectivity that most people will want to pay for because it's fairly inexpensive and very enabling. But their cars connect back to the OEM and provide information to the OEM. The interesting thing is that the cars then represent a specialized attack vector into the OEM because you can't get to where the cars can over the internet plainly. Your laptop can't. The cars are given special access. But also the back office has the ability to push out commands to enable or disable parts of the vehicle. So again, more attack surface. So we are halfway through, and let me just lay it on you. As with all things, hacking is about manipulating a computer system. Now, there happen to be between 10 and 100 computer systems living throughout your car. But the goals for hacking, as we're needing to talk about them in this industry, is to gain unintended control or influence over the car. I can turn the wheel, I can apply the brakes, I can disable the brakes, I can rev the engine, I can shift it into gear. All sorts of things that vehicularly, the mobility-wise, are vital. But also to obtain sensitive information. Maybe the information, maybe hacking means ripping secret keys out of a chip that I had to dump into fuming nitric acid and put under a microscope or attach microscopic probes to get the kind of access that we need. We've seen this done in the HSM field and particularly in entertainment industry for years. This is how some of the DVD and Blu-ray and other crypto-based systems have been hacked. Most common methods for hacking a computer system in a car: interacting with a device, which can mean a ton of different things. Maybe over the CAN or the Ethernet network, depending on how your car's put together. Maybe over the internet, using V2X, V2V, or remove the network for a moment maybe a debug interface. As I said, an ECU is a computer system, and there are often debug headers right on the board. And if the OEM, the supplier, had failed to disable the debug port before shipping, you may be able to get information that helps you hack an entire class of car or an entire class of vehicle. Also bus lines. Regular hardware attacks here are very fruitful in some cases. We tap bus lines. We're able to sniff them, see how a microcontroller is talking to an EEPROM chip, for example, or talking to a radio. We were able to take those over, modify them, manipulate the bits. Another important thing to look at is the updater mechanism, and this generally is either done over the internet directly, like in the example of the infotainment system, or using CAN and a mechanics tool. But however your firmware is being updated, the updater mechanism may be a flaw that allows for malicious firmware to be put on without your knowledge. Other wireless mechanisms, we've got a ton, and the more intelligent cars become, the more we seem to be cramming in there, like LiDAR. Who would have thought of hacking LiDAR a couple years ago? But I've seen work down the line to fake how a LiDAR sees the world so that the car may stop, or the car may swerve, or do whatever. The more we're able to control the sensors in a car, the more we can manipulate how the car thinks the world is so that it can do something that we can predict. And of course, decapping chips and power analysis. So those are all interacting with the device, and I just want to throw the fact that manipulating network traffic is another way of attacking a computer system in a car. Maybe we modify, or we block, or we spoof messages on a network. We do man-in-the-middle attacks. There are numerous ways that those can be used. So a little bit about network hacking, more detailed. CAN is mandatory to be in all vehicles sold since 2007 in the US, I believe. And the ECUs, specifically the powertrain ECUs, must be accessible to be reflashed and modified and configured over the OBD2 port. CAN is typically unencrypted. You can do encryption over it, but it's not standard or specified. Everything is broadcast. There's no source, no destination addresses or ports, and it's pretty much connectionless. So most of the things that we get out of our internet security and anti-spoofing have to do with the fact that there's a source destination address and port and some TCP three-way handshaking, and all of that is not in cars. Other ways of hacking a car, we talk about cellular. We hit the car with an SMS message, or we somehow use an IMSI catcher or something to take over and say, hey, we're the cell tower, talk to us. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Automotive Ethernet, other technologies, most in FlexRay that are gaining popularity in cars, DSRC and other V2V, V2X. So let's dive a little deeper into CAN messages, for example, or Ethernet. Automotive Ethernet would be very similar in this regard, but we'll speak about CAN for the moment. There are a few different things on a CAN network that are very interesting. First of all, we've got functional messages, such as apply the brakes, we're about to hit something, or turn the wheel, we're parking the vehicle, turn the wheel 50 degrees right, and then back up. These are messages that can be sent, spoofed. Everybody does them slightly differently, so it takes some reverse engineering. So far, these messages are very difficult to secure from other ECUs on the same CAN network. The best ways that I've seen that OEMs are currently trying to protect these are by segregating networks, having different CAN networks for example, the infotainment system that have to go through a security gateway before any messages can get to the CAN bus that controls the vehicular motion. UDS is another attack surface that is very powerful. UDS is required in most vehicles since late 2000s. UDS allows us to modify the behavioral characteristics of an ECU, like how do I accelerate in a way that is either sporty or economic, or how do I control the brakes in these circumstances versus those circumstances so that we are least likely to break free. We also use UDS to reflash ECU firmware for powertrain and other modules. It's something that's already in there, it's standardized, it's specified. So many non-full-blown OS ECUs, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes, they're basically your infotainment. The other modules make great use of these things. And there are control routines that we can make use of if with a little bit of hacking once we get into an ECU's security access mechanisms. That brings us to security access mechanisms. There's a way to authenticate your tester with an ECU so that you can gain elevated privileges. For example, when you do a reflashing, most vehicles won't just let you reflash a vehicle, an ECU, without providing a challenge response authentication. However, so far, all the authentication mechanisms that we've run into at GRIM have shown to be really lacking. So it's a speed bump, not a wall. And then fuzzing over CAN, fuzzing or over Ethernet, automotive Ethernet. These, by providing garbage data, either fully random or progressively random, we've seen a lot of crashing in ECUs. ECUs just simply don't know how to deal with various circumstances. So that's some details into automotive networks. TCP/IP and wireless hacks, still same old tricks. We see this in our infotainment systems. The difference is these systems have not had a build out with great automatic patching mechanisms built in. So we're seeing old vulnerable code. Hacking hardware. Old hardware hacking tricks apply very greatly in automotive. For example, PCB analysis. How is the board, the green board, laid out? What are the traces run between this chip and that chip? How can we manipulate those? Debug port access, we talked about those already. Some ECUs still provide a serial console to get debug data or to even, heaven forbid, gain full access to the system. Bus sniffing and modification, we talked about that a little bit too, SPI and I2C, getting on the bus, seeing what's going on and then taking it over. External storage, we're able to dump EEPROM and flash chips just like any other board that we've run into. What's being put there? Are we storing sensitive data there? Side channel attacks. This is an active, highly sexy area of research right now where we're using power analysis and electromagnetic emissions to identify what's going on. Personally, I've seen AES 256 cracked like that because of side channel attacks. We've got decapping, we've got other things. The goals of hardware hacking is full partial control of an ECU to identify sensitive data in the ECU that will allow us to hack more than just this car, and insights into how the system works, which will allow our attacks to be far more fruitful and powerful. Firmware analysis. We've got, we're looking for anything from hard-coded access keys and passwords to buffer overflows, memory or other memory corruption style exploitation. ECUs may never realize that they actually have to deal with it if we send up to the 4,095 byte limit. So firmware analysis is very helpful. We also can identify code flow and authentication bypass. Any way that we can Maybe you circumvent having to go through the security access routines to get to information or control that we want. And looking for hidden functionality. Hidden functionality is actually one of my favorite things to go hunt down, because it just shows up like a little Easter egg, and when you find it, it's so sweet. There are many other things that that firmware analysis can provide. You just got to stew in the juices there. So we talked a little bit about firmware update mechanisms before. Many times, a mechanic will have software, they've got it installed on their computer. It will talk to a car through what's called a J2534 pass-through tool. It's basically just a CAN tool that runs USB to your computer. But it's standardized so that different vendors' software can talk to the same dongle and not have to require their own and charge an arm and a leg for it. So how do the mechanics tools get their firmware to update the car? Well, they download it over the internet. Sometimes they download it over unauthenticated or HTTP or just all the old stuff that we've seen in the past on the internet. This is still sometimes available here in the automotive field. So things that we can check is the firmware or the calibration data signed, and how is the signature verified? How I like to think of it as, how does a modder get to mod this firmware? Because thinking like that often allows me to find the quickest path to getting malicious firmware running on an ECU. So the goals here are steal all the firmwares for offline analysis, and then modify and install malicious firmware. Overall vehicle assessments are broken into two different types. First of all, there's the complete vehicle hacks. This is where we're looking at a car holistically and focusing on a system to attack a system. For example, the remote keyless entry system. This requires 2 or 3 different ECUs in a car to attack, and so their firmware becomes very interesting. The CAN messages between them become very interesting. If we can simply get on a CAN bus and act like one of these modules, we can circumvent a lot of security oftentimes. But the next, and obviously complete vehicle hacks, this is something that OEMs are very interested in, because it's where they're thinking, where they're focused. And then ECU hacks, from a supplier's perspective, or maybe an OEM. How is the security architecture on an ECU? How well is it designed to withstand hacking? How well did they implement the thing? And then talking to an ECU, enumerating it, gaining as much information, and exploiting it. Because a car is really a part of a system of systems, of systems, of systems, of systems. We have a traffic system, for instance, and unfortunately we can't talk about that in this prezo, although, hey, I might be convinced into something there later. But then we have complete vehicle overview and attacks, ECUs, automotive networks, internet, V2X, GPS, nav. There are many other things in this traffic system that we need to take into account, but we don't have time today. Traffic systems, control networks, roadways and tolls, the GPS navigation infrastructure, the things that provide those services, and V2X infrastructure side, the light networks, the traffic light networks, and other things. So let's talk a little bit about goal-oriented assessments. This is a different approach, but this really focuses on system. The systemic approach is, can I gain code execution on any or all of the ECUs in a car? If so, I may have a great place to launch attacks in the future, even if you may think of it as a non-vital system, like a mirror control module, for example. Your remote keyless entry, your passive key analysis, how do I get into the vehicle? How can I unlock the immobilizer, start the car, drive away? Then we've got other things where the immobilizer is just the goal. How do we break the immobilizer? There's been so much work put into immobilizers to try to make them not allow a thief to steal a car. How well have they done? Wi-Fi analysis. What can I get to when I'm connected to Wi-Fi or Bluetooth? What services are offered? Infotainment, navigation system, internet. What services are being offered to the internet without any authentication, for example? It's a great question that needs to be asked before any car rolls. Other things like, how do I modify the power steering? How do I modify brakes? How do I modify the engine? Full car hacking then takes the systems of these ECUs and the communication architecture and raises them to a new level of how do I take the small attacks and break them into and put them together to gain something even more. Okay, I'll take a step back and look at ECUs for a moment. There are three primary different ECU types, but they're broken into two categories. First of all, we've got raw firmware ECUs. They're the ones that don't have Linux or QNX or Windows Mobile or Android running underneath them. They have a raw firmware. The event model is very tied closely to the chip that they're written for, and it doesn't have a whole lot of. It's not preemptive multitasking. Let's just go there. So those actually have two different kinds of ECUs, in my opinion. The first of all are mobility ECUs. They control motion and safety. For example, the brakes. ABS modules control the brakes. They're very vital to safety. Power steering control module, the powertrain, transmission, the restraint controls. These are all safety critical systems. But there are other ECUs, the appendages as I like to call them, door modules. They don't have as much in them that controls safety. I keep referring to it, but my favorite is the mirror control module. Then we have full OS ECUs. These are where we've got Linux, QNX, Android, Windows. They're generally the ARM systems running in-vehicle infotainment or navigation. So if we're doing raw firmware, hacking of these ECUs, it's kind of rustic style, but it's some of the coolest hacking. It requires a lot of reverse engineering, and I enjoy that. So hey, that's cool for me. CAN and UDS are generally the most powerful attacks, largely because the authentication mechanisms, security access mechanisms, are also generally fairly broken. So how do I gain access to a car? Well, I've got a couple different mechanisms that I can already use, but hey, if I can gain access to reflashing an ECU, then putting my own malicious firmware on there is great, and I can control code execution from there. From a mobility ECU perspective, I can control everything from speed messages to the steering wheel to the brakes themselves. But from an appendage ECU, like your rear view mirror, I can set up shop and nobody will ever find me. And if I have access to send disable the brakes messages or turn the wheel messages and have them be listened to, you'll never find me and I have full control. On our full OS, these are the most complex, the most well-known architectures. A throwback to my favorite pink little girl's toy called the I Am Me, so cool and connected. They are the thing to attack remotely. From there, you can attack them via CAN, or you can attack CAN from these systems. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth are great attacks, but these are the ones that get you from the internet. So I wanted to make sure that we point out any method of communication as a potential attack vector. Internet attacks being the most beautiful, but there's so many things that we can do with the introduction of new technologies in cars. I wanted to point that out specifically. And we're winding down. I wanted to give a pro tip. Hacking for assessment, if you're an OEM or a supplier, or if you've got any component that is having a security assessment done, I want to make it very clear, obscurity is not inherently evil. If you rely wholly on obscurity for your security, then you're screwed. But obscurity is not evil. It's seldom valuable in a security analysis, however. It simply keeps the team from getting to the important stuff, or limits how much time they can spend there. So I highly recommend consider a light gray box assessment. This is where an attacker comes in, they do open source research, open information research, they do internet Google searching, they spend time looking at the system as an attacker who doesn't have insider information. But as they run into things they want to know, you answer it for them. You plug them into an engineer. You don't hold anything back. And what this allows an attacker to do is to know where it's going to be difficult from a black box perspective, but to give you the value of a white box assessment, and also not stress them to try to make sure that they get full coverage. That's where the light gray comes in and allows them to simply explore and identify weaknesses that you didn't think were possible. So key takeaways here. Hacking a car can mean many things. For the security discussions, hacking is the manipulation of computer systems to gain unintended control like steering and brakes, to obtain sensitive information. Maybe that sensitive information allows you to hack all the cars, or maybe it allows you to turn on the microphone and simply download people's conversations. Every interface in an automobile or any computer system can be an attack vector and needs to be considered. Every programmable microcontroller can be hacked. What does the attacker gain when an ECU is hacked? Think about that in a different way. What do they gain when a microcontroller is hacked? And the answer is, very simply, anything that the microcontroller can do. So if the microcontroller is able to send CAN messages, they can send CAN messages. If they can enable or disable the brakes, now an attacker can. Seemingly benign ECUs are still a point of persistence and should be considered, not left out when doing security analysis and assessment. And for security assessments, highly recommend a tiered approach. Begin with a security architecture review and keep diving down until you get to a deep analysis of the key important systems that control the safety for your customers. Assess all interfaces: CAN, LIN, JTAG, SPI, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, your TPMS, and other things. Heck, we'll probably have Zigbee before long. Make sure that you get your V2V interfaces well scoured. And then reduce your obscurity for testers because it's the highest value for you. And let's face it, there are a ton of ECUs that need good assessment and a ton of cars that require systemic attacks. Having them all be attacked with full obscurity will reduce whatever value you might get. And that is all that I have for today. I will hand this back over to Mike. Thank you for your patience.
Nice job. Nice job, Matt. I have a question for you. You greatly canvassed this. I love that you did put this in the context of we're talking about a system of systems, but you also broke it down to specific components. And when you started talking about the model of an ECU, I chuckled a little bit to myself. I've known you for over a decade. I've watched your work in smart meters, for example, and I could tell you the model you paint, from network to debug to bus lines to the update mechanism to the wireless chips that might be there, to the chip itself and scraping, just remind me is the exact same model for a smart meter, right? And how we attacked the research side of testing, and then ultimately that learning turned into some security enhancements for smart meters. They're much more hardened today than they were when they first hit the market. So that's a great example of an other industry model. What, when you do that, what do we have to learn? So what is, transferable in terms of things like the smart meter journey as it relates to automotive ECUs and smart meters? Anything you'd like to reflect on there?
So it turns out that I have found that anything that you learn in technology is potentially transferable from one industry to the other. And it's why I break it down to a conversation of microcontrollers and computer systems. Because ECUs are too easy to look at as a black box that is automotive specific. Oh, those are special automotive computers. Mm-hmm. They're actually a microcontroller with a board. They were designed for automotive. They have automotive ideas in mind and automotive firmware and communications mechanisms, but they're still a computer system. And so how do we, so it's more the conceptual model that carries over the best. Now the biggest difference between the power grid and automotive is the culture, for example. The culture in automotive is going to be very, very different. So the constraints that the developers are under, the ways that they are pushed to develop, their turnaround time, their repurchase time, all of these differ from power grid to automotive. Although some of the longer time frames are still similar, but they're thought of in very different ways. Right. So my recommendation is, if you have hardware love, hardware firmware love, and you've done stuff on IoT or on smart meters or medical devices, also a couple of my very favorite places to play, spend some time with cars. Hit me up. I can get you set up with a couple tools that'll get you started, and then hopefully my kids and my wife and your kids and your wife will be safer.
That's right. Building that community of folks that will benefit the ecosystem. So let me ask you this question too. What's the importance of timing, accurate timing signals within the vehicles relates to CAN bus and the ECUs? And how does that get provided? And do you see an attack surface or risk there as it relates to the timing services?
Actually, let me back up and ask you a question, because I was going to go somewhere. I'm not sure you were actually heading. What do you mean by timing?
Sure. So, when we look at other industrial system of systems, the importance of good time signals for sequencing of messages and is critical for the system to work. Most of our example for power plants will have a GPS unit come in providing a clear timing signal to the DCS bus. And so when you're looking at time, it's just actually system time to provision that as a service on a platform.
Sure. Because of the tightly coupled nature of the ECUs in a vehicle, timing is a bit less important than it is in the power grid. The actual real time that the car thinks it is has some of the impacts that you might think. Like if I've cracked a CA certificate that's actually expired, but I can trick the car into thinking that it hasn't expired, that's an attack surface. But for the most part, when I think of timing in automotive, most of the time I'm going to go towards the periodic messages that are sent every tenth of a second, or whatever period is acceptable for a particular message. Like there are many different messages in a car that are simply sent every tenth of a second or less, like the status of door openings and the trunk and the light switch and other things that many times your functional messages are not a single message that says turn on the lights. It's more of a bit that gets modified in a periodic message that simply means turn on the lights. And as soon as that bit switches back to 0 in the periodic messages, the lights turn off. So that's the timing that I was thinking of. And actually timing in that regard can be a great enabler in security, because identifying strange behaviors in a car can have to do with the time delta between the receipt of a periodic message. Meaning, it's very likely that we've had spoofed messages. So these can trigger things like the security access mechanism checking and saying, hey, does it look like we've had any spoofed messages on the bus with regard to blah, 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 blah? Oh, yeah, it actually does. So I'm going to withhold allowing security access for another 5 seconds, and then we'll see. Check again.
Good point.
This will,
so one more question. This one from the audience,
ahead.
Matt. This one from the audience. I want to get this in because we respect everyone's time here. Can you talk about some of the SDKs, such as from Ford Motor Corporation? How does one get them? Where do you start, etc.?
Googling is a great start, but I can tell you the Ford one. It's OpenXC, I believe. Yeah, OpenXC is Ford's platform. OpenXCplatform.com. They've got developer kit and allowing for the basically a pretty easy setup to participate in the network of the car. Also, developer.ford here. Let me just paste this in as a message. And I apologize. I would love to. Okay, where are we going here? I don't think I can send a message to everybody.
Right. Carol can do that for you. Okay.
All right, go ahead, Carol. Here's one. And I apologize. If you Google for similar in other OEMs, you should be able to find a few others. Ford is really leading the front on the modification market, I believe, because they've been doing this OpenXC for a number of years, which is why I know about it.
Fantastic. Hey, thank you, Matt, so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Carol. We respect everyone's time. Hopefully you found it very informative. I think you covered a very complex topic very well. You create a bunch of important mental models for people to take away and consider. Thank you so much, Matt. Carol, back to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Matt and Mike, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. Any questions that are not answered during this webcast can be submitted to q@sans.org, and then we can bring them to the appropriate person. And for a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, you can visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.